This is Jeff Wolf, Director of Reimbursement at Bessler, and today we're going to talk about Easy Workpaper Workspace comments and the settlement process. So let's start with Workspace comments. Every workspace within Easy Workpaper, so in this case we're looking at Worksheet A, has the ability to have comments. So when you click here on the menu bar, you have Workspace comments, and you have two flavors. You have public and internal comments. Public comments are those things you want to document that this is the work paper, this is what its purpose is, what we're trying to do, any things that you have to do to get it done. But these are the comments, because they're public, they will be printed on the printed report for that work paper. So not only are you going to see them, but review person's going to see them, auditors are going to see them, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that these public comments are comments that are related to, the issues at hand and the work that's being performed, rather than the other flavor of comments, which is internal comments. Internal comments are more for you, the staff member, in working with Easy Workpapers, because you may have a work paper that's a very complex work paper. You have to remember to load 2 or 3 different things. You have to remember to do this analysis in Excel and then attach it and type those numbers into these places, something like that, whatever the issues are. These internal comments don't get printed on the printed report for the work paper. They have a separate location for the printed report for these, which I'll show you in a second. But they're where you put your instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3. So if you have multiple people working in your reimbursement department and you rotate the hospitals between those staff members every couple of years or something to get new eyes on the cost report, this is a great way of making sure consistency of treatment of issues, because the new person will have a list of the instructions or the complicated issues that they have to address. It also works really well when you have new staff members that come on board. They get to a work paper that's a complex work paper, and they know what the issues are that they have to address, that kind of thing. So again, internal comments are for you. They're not printed on the printed report for the workspace, but they have a separate report under the management reports. And then public comments are the ones that will be printed on the printed report for the work paper. They're part of your work paper documentation. So if we take a look at the printed report for Worksheet A, so we have a summary and a detailed printed report here for Worksheet A. If I double click on the summary printed report, you can see here it's by department. And as we go to the last page of the report, and I'm actually going to slide back 1 page, because after my grand total and my audit tags is my workspace comments. And you get about 1/3 of it there, and then we fall to the last page where it continues with the rest of the comments. So that'll show up on all of your printed reports. If we go and look at the detailed printed report for Worksheet A, just takes a minute because this is a big demo hospital. And if we go to the last page of that report again, after our grand total, after the audit tags, there's our workspace comments. So full documentation with those workspace comments. They don't change drastically from year to year. So consequently, all workspace comments, both the public and the internal, go with that work paper from year to year. So they stay with that work paper when you create the next fiscal year. So that's how public comments work. The internal ones, again, the instructions, if you come up to the top under options, you have management reports and you have your internal comments. And I find this very helpful because, like I said, when you start your cost report, you're able to have a printed report of all of the issues or the complicated work papers or the things you don't want to forget to do this year that maybe you had forgotten in prior years. So consequently, you have this nice report at the beginning of the cost report of all your complex things and things that you can do, and you don't have to worry about remembering to do that all the time. Again, that works for the staff that did the work last year. It helps remind us not to do or not to miss things. It works for if you're rotating your staff through, because that was going to maintain consistency of approach. And then also it helps with new staff because they have a list of the things and the steps and the order that they have to do things in. So those are your workspace comments, and again, they go on printed reports, and every work paper can have those, and they're independent for each work paper. Let's talk now about settlement. So for Medicare settlement, you have a PS&R you can load in and your revenue and usage files. With the revenue and usage files, what you'll notice is you can load a separate revenue usage file. You see here I've got acute revenue usage inpatient. You can load one for outpatient. You can load one for psych, rehab, SNF, vaccines, and you can actually create custom ones. You can see I created one called Doodads and Inpatient Part B and Jeff's Special. So you can create ones that you may need for some special purpose, but most people use the inpatient acute and the inpatient the outpatient acute revenue and usage files. And you can see I've got those two loaded here. One's the inpatient, one's the outpatient. As we go down to the settlement workspaces themselves, you can see here that under the settlement Medicare, we have 6 workspaces that we need to address. And we should do them in this order. The first workspace that we're going to address is PS&R report disposition for inpatient services. Basically, what will happen is the entire PS&R was loaded. So these are all the report types that were included in that PS&R, including the ones we're not going to use, like the MSP, or ones that apply to a different fiscal year. And in this case, you'll notice I've got include and the worksheet designation. They are white columns, which means you can manually make those identifications, or you can use apply default. And apply defaults will look at the end of your fiscal year, it'll look at the period that's in here, and it will match things up and process. And it'll automatically fill in what should be included and what should be on which worksheet. Same thing is true for outpatient. Again, we have all the report types, all the different column off the PS&R. In this provider's case, they had 2 columns, a 14 and a 15. And by using the apply default, it fills in the include, the worksheet, and the column number that the item goes in on worksheet D Part 5. So all that's actually taken care of for you by just saying apply defaults. But again, you have the ability to manually make those changes if you have some exception or something like that. So really identifying which PS&R report types get included in your PS&R, we're talking about a couple of minutes at most. You then have the ability to review your revenue usage grouping. So when you loaded your revenue usage file in, you would have loaded the department number, the revenue code, and the revenue. We stole the grouping from worksheet C. And that works really well because you know the department and we know the grouping, but you'll notice that in some cases, there's an ability to make corrections. In this case, virtual beds is cost report line 50, and that's really because it's OR beds. And so we're grouping that to cost report line 50, but it's revenue code 110. We really should put that in cost report line 30. So you have the ability to make corrections to your revenue code or to your groupings. So there's 3 things that I look for in settlement or in the review of the revenue usage grouping. And the first one is I look at all the routine revenue codes and I make sure that they are all going to routine departments because that's where they should be. That's truly where the patient was. Sometimes you'll see things like cost for line 50, or if we go further down, we might find one that's in observation. Of course, I don't see one that's in observation before we get down to the Rev Code 250s, but you could have some in observation. They may be grouped in the emergency room. You need to move those up to line 30 or 31 if it's ICU. The second thing that we do is we look at the revenue codes that are grouped above cost report line. So let me sort this. Above cost report line for inpatient above cost report line 30, and they need to be grouped based on the revenue code. So these are admin departments. We cannot use those on worksheet D Part 5 or D-3. So consequently, we have to regroup those. Now we have some wizards that allow you to understand where this stuff should be grouped. You can see here I've got a revenue code 942, currently for nutrition services grouped to line 10. I can look at the rev code allocations and I can see that 100% of it's actually going to line 65 and so consequently, I can group it in line 65. If we look at Rev Code 250, again, can click on it, and 100% is going to line 73. So then I can group that to line 73. If we look at lab, you can see that most of lab is going to 86. Some of it's going to, to cost for line 60. Some of it's going to a 6001, and a little bit's going to cardiac cath. So my majority is going to line 60, so that's where I chose to group that. So you can regroup those that are in an admin department that need to be addressed. Otherwise, you would lose this revenue off of your revenue usage file. And then finally, the last thing is once in a while you find that people have credits on their revenue usage file, negative numbers. If we're going to use these numbers to do percent to total allocations, you don't want to have negatives because that can cause more than a 100% allocation. So consequently, we can sort these and identify and remove them automatically so that our adjusted revenue does not get impacted by those negative numbers. And you can do that for both inpatient, outpatient, any of the revenue code or revenue usage files that you loaded in. Once you've done that, we move on to settlement data assignment. And settlement data assignment is basically all of the items off the PS&R that are not charges. So deductible, coinsurance, net reimbursement, DRG payments, all of those kinds of items. And you'll notice that as we slide over to the right, you can manually, again, either include items, what worksheet, what part, what line, what column do they go on, or you can say apply defaults. And when you do apply defaults, because you can have multiple provider numbers, acute hospital, psych unit, rehab, RHCs, whatever, you can, by provider number, you can use the pull down menu to say, this is my acute care hospital. And then the next one might be your rehab, or the next one might be an RHC, whatever the issue is. And then you say, okay. So you would do that for each of your provider numbers, list them down, hit okay, and it will automatically populate these columns for you. So just like on the PS&R report dispositions for inpatient and outpatient, we will do this work for you, but you have the ability to make any adjustments for some unique issues that your hospital may have. And then we'll go on to the settlement revenue assignment. When you first get into the settlement revenue assignment, all of these will actually say do not use, and it's because they have not been used yet. So let me put them all back to do not use. And this way, this is what you'll actually experience. All of these are currently not allocated, not assigned. So you can do them manually by saying, I want this one to be the acute inpatient revenue and usage. I want to use that for my allocation. If it doesn't find one, it says, hey, that revenue code does not exist in your revenue usage file. Maybe I used 110 or I used 100. So you know that that would have to be done manually. So that would be under a direct allocation. And then you can come in and say, that goes to cost for line 30. 100%, or you can say 50%, whatever you need, okay? And you can save it. Oops, I got 1 penny too much. Forgot to put a cost for line. So it does give you warnings if you forget to do things. And so now I've got that, go ahead and I've got it allocated in there. If you want to, you can use the apply defaults. And this is actually the way that most of us do the settlement process. By hitting apply defaults, we go in and we say, I'm going to use the acute revenue usage file for inpatient. For inpatient Part B, I'm probably going to use the acute outpatient. And the same thing for all the outpatients. So I'm going to go ahead and do the assignment based on the revenue usage file. And you notice now most of these are assigned based on the revenue usage file all the way down, inpatient and outpatient, okay? So you can do the revenue usage file. The other thing in settlement is you have crosswalks. and any of those revenue codes that you had to manually move on your worksheet C. And when I say manually, we moved them with the computer. We did work paper references or whatever to move them. But the issues are your drugs, your supplies, your implants, and maybe even in this case, your observation. All of those are items that Medicare made you move on worksheet C. And so we can do the same thing here by saying apply defaults. Now that I've done the revenue usage, for those revenue codes in my standard crosswalk, I can override. So for those revenue codes, I'm going to say ignore what I did in the revenue usage file and use the crosswalk. Medicare expects those to be in a certain place, and you'll notice now drugs are in 73, regardless of where my revenue usage file had them. If we go and look at OR services, they were forced to line 50 because that's what we needed to do per the standard crosswalk. So only those revenue codes in our standard crosswalk are impacted. Then you can just sort the whole thing, and I'd see the ones that still say do not use. And you can see these are the ones where the revenue code did not exist in our revenue usage file. They're pretty small dollars compared to the numbers that are in this particular facility. They're pretty small dollars, but now you can go ahead and directly assign those. So let me go ahead and directly assign these. And then we can use the wizard to say this one, which happens to be trauma level 3, that's going to go to the emergency room 100% and done. And then we can go to the next one. It's Holter monitor. That's probably going to be in the ICU 100%. And then we can go to the next one, OB. Well, that's going to be line 30. And then we can go to the next one, home dialysis, which would be 74. And you can see this quickly. You can go through those. Trauma, again, it's going to be emergency room. Delivery room is 52, 100%. And we got 2 more to go. Holter monitor, we're going to put in line 31 for the ICU. And then the last one, dialysis, again, goes to 74, 100%. And now all of them have been allocated. You can see here they're all 100%. Oops, if we go all the way to the top. And now we have one here that does not have 100%. What that means is the revenue existed in the revenue usage file, but it was a $0 amount. So the last thing that I do is I sort by the percentage, and you notice I have 2 that did not get allocated. If I look at the wizard, you can see it didn't know where to send them because there was no actual revenue. And those I'm going to change to a direct allocation as well. And we'll just identify those. So stress tests we'll probably put in 65. And occupational therapy, we'll put that in 66. We'll assume that they have all their PTOTST in one line. And now I've got all of my settlement revenue assigned. The last step at that point is the units, and units are the days. And we use the charge spread. So whatever we did with charges, the days will follow. So if we split the days between ICU and acute, we'll split, if we split the charges, we'll also split the days. You can override that and say, no, I want to use a separate allocation or a direct assignment or whatever. You can do that. But most of our clients use the charge spread because the days should follow the charges. Once you're done with that, all you need to do is start the review process. And with the review process, there's 3 reports that I tend to look at. The first one is the settlement data by worksheet by column, which shows you for all of the non-charge items. Here's the federal specific payment going to worksheet E Part A line 101. Here's the outlier payment going to worksheet A line 2. If we have 2 different report types, gross APC payments for 12P and 13P, we'll add them up. E Part B line 3 is going to get $1.7 million. So it's a full documentation of what we're actually going to send out to the cost report and where that came off the PS&R. I use this with my hard copy PS&R, and I just check to make sure that everything went where I expected it to go. The second report that I look at is settlement revenue by rev code. And this is your revenue code to cost center crosswalk. Basically, it's going to show you for each revenue code, how did we allocate it, what percentage, and which cost report lines. So in this case, room and board, revenue code 120, total PS&R charges are 2.1 million. We did a direct allocation. Cost report lines 30 and 31, we did a 50-50 split, and there's the dollars. Here's one ICU, revenue code 200, was split based on the revenue usage file between line 30 and 31. 3.9% went to line 30, 96.06% went to line 31, and there's your dollar amounts. So this shows you by revenue code, what did you do with it, where did you send it, and how did you calculate the split or the spread. So it was direct, revenue usage, standard crosswalk, whatever the issue is, full documentation. The final report that I look at is settlement revenue assignment by cost center. And I look at this one because there's surprisingly how many times I find, if I'm looking at cost for line 30, I'll find some revenue that really doesn't belong there. And so you can come down and see room and board, I'm getting 50% of it, it's $1 million. OB, I'm getting 100% at $16,000. Intensive care, I'm getting the 3.94, the $40,000. 206, ICU intermediate, it's actually a routine level of care. So 90% of that's coming here to line 30. OR minor, it's 3.1%. I'm not that worried about it, but it does happen. OR minor can happen in the room and board unit, and that's where the nurse goes ahead and does a lancing of a boil or something like that, some small incision into the skin that happens. So you'll have those kinds of things. And then, of course, minor amount of treatment room. And as you go through these reports, you'll see, different cost report lines with the different revenue codes, and you can make sure that they all make sense to you. Some of the revenue codes, like lab, and so I'm going to go to lab real quick. You'll notice that only 97 or 68% of lab services ended up there, and we're actually finding that more common these days. If I go back to the last report, the one that's by revenue code, we're actually finding that lab and EKGs in particular, so let me go to rev code 3, oops, there was 300. So you can see here 300 is going to 60 and 63. So in this particular provider, we've got a little bit of the labs going to 60 and 63, but not so much spread over the hospital. We do see, though, more and more at hospitals that that'll happen where the basic lab is at other departments because the point of care lab tests, the what blood type are you and what's your sugar level, can be administered by anybody. It doesn't need a lab personnel. So we do see that spreading around a little more. Same thing's true with EKG. The simple EKG that's done in the OR and the ER and in the clinics and some of the other departments, it's just putting those leads on and running the machine and the tape comes out. Any nurse aide can do that, and then the doc can read the EKG. So you'll see that those more and more are spreading to multiple departments because it's not just the EKG staff running those or the lab staff running those. But you'll notice you have reports for all of the different activities we did, whether it's which PS&R report types we included, what settlement data we included, where we included it, how all the things we did to the revenue usage file, and then the settlement revenue and the settlement units. So full documentation with that. I hope you've enjoyed that. This is Jeff Wolf, Director of Reimbursement, and today we've been talking about Workspace comments and Medicare settlement.